People always talk about the moment they fall in love. No one warns you about the moment you realize you've been forgotten. The thought hit Sophia Wells somewhere between her second glass of water and the melting ice in her mocktail. Hi family, I need you to help subscribe to this channel to help us grow, and to help us give you more interesting stories. Thank you. Now let's continue. The restaurant clock ticked louder than the music, each second stretching into something sharp and embarrassing. She had chosen this place because it was quiet, intimate, the kind of spot that made ordinary evenings feel like memories. Tonight she expected one of those nights, special but simple. She had spent the afternoon ironing her favorite olive green dress, curling the edges of her hair until they framed her face softly, and adding perfume sparingly like her mother once taught her. When she arrived, the waiter had smiled politely and led her to a corner table set for two. There was a candle, a small vase with fresh daisies, and an extra plate waiting across from hers. She ordered water, then a mocktail, checking her phone every few minutes while pretending not to. It had been 45 minutes since Liam Starr said he was on his way. She tried to believe it. Traffic, bad network, maybe his battery died. But even her optimism began to fray at the edges as couples came and left, as laughter from other tables reminded her how alone she looked. The waiter approached again with that hesitant politeness reserved for awkward moments, asking if she would like to order. She said she'd wait. He nodded, smiled gently, and walked away. Her phone remained silent. The chat with Liam sat open, the last message from her still blue-ticked. Can't wait to see you, red heart. Every time she looked at it, the heart emoji felt heavier, foolish. The ice in her drink had melted into nothing. Her shoulders stiffened, her smile practiced, her throat tight. She scrolled aimlessly, pretending to read something interesting, just to look busy. She adjusted her bracelet, fixed her napkin, and stared at the candle as if it could distract her from the truth pressing against her chest. She wasn't waiting for him anymore. She was waiting for the courage to stand up and walk out without looking desperate. Outside the window, the city moved normally. People hurrying, headlights flashing, laughter spilling from passing cars. But for her, time slowed to humiliation. She noticed every detail. The scraping of cutlery, the whisper of a waiter near the bar, the clink of a glass someone raised in a toast. Each sound was sharper because it filled the silence where Liam's voice should have been. She replayed their morning conversation in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. It sounded fine, warm. He'd even said, "Don't be late, Soph." So what changed? Was it her? Did she say something wrong the night before? The questions pressed harder the longer she sat there. A couple nearby exchanged glances, their pity poorly hidden, and that was the moment something inside her cracked. She felt heat rise behind her eyes but blinked it back quickly. Crying in public wasn't an option. She pressed her lips together and whispered under her breath, "Get up, Sophia." But her body didn't move. Her pride and heartbreak were locked in a quiet war. It wasn't about Liam anymore. It was about not wanting to walk out alone after 2 hours of waiting. She knew people would look. They'd whisper. They'd think what they wanted. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slower, and began to reach for her bag. The same moment a soft shadow fell across her table. A man at a nearby seat was standing, adjusting his wristwatch as if timing his own escape from the night. For a moment, she thought he was just leaving, until she realized he was looking at her, not through her. He gave a polite nod, nothing invasive, but enough to make her glance down, embarrassed that someone had noticed her situation. He moved toward the door, stopped briefly, and handed his card to the waiter with a quiet word she couldn't hear. The waiter looked surprised but nodded. Sophia didn't understand what just happened until a few minutes later when she asked for her bill, and the waiter smiled softly. "It's been taken care of, ma'am." Confused, she asked who. The waiter only pointed discreetly toward the window, where the man was just getting into a car. Sophia followed his movement, catching only a glimpse, tall, calm, no arrogance, just a certain quiet composure. The car pulled away before she could process the moment. For a few seconds, she sat frozen, not knowing whether to feel grateful or humiliated. Someone had paid for her meal, Not because she couldn't afford it, but because she'd looked abandoned. The thought stung. Yet beneath the sting was a flicker of something else, kindness, maybe, humanity at least. She clutched her bag tighter, murmured a thank you to the waiter, and finally stood up. Outside, the air felt cooler than she expected. The street smelled faintly of roasted corn and rain. She walked slowly toward the bus stop, heels clicking against the pavement, telling herself not to cry, not tonight. But as she reached the curb and waited for the light to change, her phone buzzed. A single message from Liam. Sorry. Something came up. Just that. No explanation, no apology worth the hours she'd wasted. She exhaled sharply, locked her phone, and tucked it into her purse. Somewhere behind her, the same car that had driven off earlier slowed near the corner. She didn't notice. All she knew was that she was done waiting. Even if she didn't yet know, someone else had already started noticing her in silence. The streetlight changed from red to green, spilling its color across the wet pavement as Sophia finally stepped off the curb. The car that had slowed earlier moved forward again, its headlights brushing past her before disappearing into traffic. She didn't notice the license plate, only the faint reflection of her own tired face in the window as it passed. She crossed the road and entered the small park opposite the restaurant, needing a few minutes to breathe before calling a ride home. The night air carried the faint scent of rain and roasted corn from a nearby stall. It was the kind of smell that should have been comforting but now only deepened her ache. She sat on one of the benches, slipped off her heels, and massaged her feet quietly. The hum of the city wrapped around her, distant yet familiar. Her phone rested beside her, silent again after that single message. The words replayed in her head. Sorry. Something came up. Like a bad song she couldn't stop humming. She wanted to delete the chat, erase every trace of him, but her thumb hesitated each time she opened the app. It wasn't love holding her back. It was the memory of effort, the energy she'd poured into something that now ended with an excuse. She sighed and leaned back, watching a plane blink across the dark sky, wondering how someone could care so little about being replaced. A voice inside her whispered that maybe she had expected too much. People got tired, relationships ended, life went on. But another voice, the one that still carried her dignity, argued that no decent person would leave someone waiting in public without even a call. Between those two thoughts, her heart balanced uneasily. After a few minutes, she slipped her heels back on and started walking toward the bus stop again. A drizzle began, light at first, then steadier. She pulled her scarf over her head and hurried along the pavement. The same dark car she'd seen earlier was parked near the corner, engine still running. When she passed it, the window lowered halfway. She tensed instinctively, ready to keep walking, but a calm male voice spoke. Not loud, just enough for her to hear. You dropped this. She froze, turned slightly, and saw a small silver hairpin resting on the edge of the car window. Her hand went to the side of her hair. One pin was missing. She blinked, unsure when it had fallen, but the recognition was instant. The man extended it toward her without stepping out. She reached forward, took it quickly, murmured a quiet thank you, and started to move on. The car stayed still for a moment, then rolled beside her slowly as she walked. You shouldn't be walking alone this late, he said, voice still even. She hesitated, then saw his face clearly in the dim light, familiar from the restaurant. He wasn't the kind of man who stood out for his looks alone, but for the quiet steadiness in his eyes, the type of expression that said he saw more than he said. I'm fine, she replied softly, and he nodded, as if he already expected that answer. Still, he said, let me drop you at least to the main road. She wanted to refuse again, pride whispering that accepting kindness would make her seem weak, but the rain grew heavier and her hair was already damp. She paused, weighed her options, and finally opened the door. The warmth of the car surprised her. The scent of leather mixed with faint cologne, subtle and calm. She fastened her seatbelt quietly, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. The man drove without music, his movements precise, his silence comfortable. When they stopped at the junction that led to her street, she unbuckled and reached for the handle. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded once, his gaze steady on the road ahead. "No need," he murmured. "Just don't let someone like that change how you see yourself." For a moment, Sophia looked at him properly. The same man who had paid her bill, now telling her words that sounded like advice but felt more like concern. She didn't reply. Instead, she nodded slightly and stepped out into the drizzle. He waited until she crossed to her side of the street before driving off, the car's taillights fading into the distance. She stood there a while, the rain soft against her skin, feeling something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not affection, not yet, but a fragile sort of comfort that someone had noticed her pain without taking advantage of it. When she entered her apartment, the silence pressed around her again, but it wasn't the same as before. She dropped her bag on the couch, removed her earrings, and stared at her reflection in the mirror by the door. Mascara smudged slightly under her eyes, lipstick faded, but the girl staring back didn't look defeated anymore. She looked tired, yes, but also awake in a new way. She remembered the man's calm tone, his simple words, and how he hadn't asked for her number or her name. That made his kindness feel purer, like a favor done for its own sake. Later that night, as she dried her hair and scrolled through social media to distract herself, a notification popped up on a neighborhood forum she followed. A post about a local business sponsoring free weekend meals for single diners at the same restaurant she'd been in earlier. The sponsor's name read Noah Rain Foundation. She paused, reading it twice. It wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was his way of doing small good things quietly. She smiled faintly, closed her phone, and whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, stranger." Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle again. The city exhaled softly, its lights blinking like tired stars. Somewhere not far away, Noah Rain sat in his parked car, glancing once more at the restaurant sign before driving off into the night, unaware that the woman he'd noticed would soon change the rhythm of his own quiet life. The next morning came with the smell of rain still clinging to the air, the kind that made the city look softer, less hurried. Sophia woke earlier than usual, the events of the previous night replaying in fragments she didn't quite know how to piece together. The text from Liam was still on her phone, unread since she'd locked it before bed. She didn't bother opening it again. Instead, she scrolled through the news and saw a short feature about the local restaurant offering complimentary dinners courtesy of the Noah Rain Foundation. It was a quiet validation that she hadn't imagined him, that the moment at the curb hadn't been some misplaced act of pity. She brewed coffee and stood by the kitchen window while it steamed, letting the morning light settle on her face. The quiet of her apartment was almost peaceful. There was no buzzing phone, no anxious wait, no pretending. Just stillness. She realized how long it had been since she'd felt that. By the time she was dressed for work, jeans, a cream blouse, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. The heaviness from the night before had thinned into something manageable. She wasn't sure if she felt better or simply numb, but either was easier to carry. On her way out, she noticed the hairpin on the counter, the same one Noah had returned. She picked it up, turned it over between her fingers, and pinned it back into her hair. It was strange how something so small could carry so much memory. Her office sat above a small stationery shop downtown. She worked as a design assistant for a printing company, mostly quiet work, layouts, samples, color corrections. It suited her temperament, but that morning, she found herself glancing toward the window more than usual. At noon, when her supervisor sent her to pick up client proofs from a nearby cafe printer, she didn't realize it was the same one mentioned in the online post until she stepped inside. The air smelled of espresso and vanilla syrup, the faint hum of a jazz playlist filling the corners. She handed over the documents at the counter and waited. As she looked around, her gaze caught on a familiar figure sitting near the window, a man focused on his laptop, a cup of coffee beside him, a black pen twirling absently between his fingers. She hesitated, half sure she was imagining it, until he looked up. Recognition passed between them instantly. Noah Rain. He gave a small, polite nod. She smiled in return, uncertain whether to approach. Before she could decide, the barista called her name. She collected the folder and turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her quietly. "You found your hairpin." She turned back, surprised he'd remembered. "I did," she said, keeping her tone light. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, she walked over and sat. It felt natural, almost too natural, like resuming a conversation that hadn't really ended. The cafe was busy, so they talked softly. She mentioned work, how she'd nearly switched fields last year. He listened, genuinely, the way people rarely do anymore. He told her he worked in development, something about community projects and rebuilding old spaces. Nothing showy, just ordinary effort dressed in humility. She found herself laughing more than she expected to, not because he said anything particularly funny, but because his calm had a way of disarming her. When her coffee arrived, she realized she hadn't thought of Liam once during their exchange. The ache that used to pulse at the back of her mind had gone quiet. She wondered if Noah noticed the shift in her expression because his eyes lingered a second longer before he looked down again. Time slipped by unnoticed. Her phone buzzed twice on the table. Messages from friends asking about the failed date, but she ignored them. She wasn't ready to explain anything yet, not while something new and unspoken was forming in the space between two strangers over half-empty coffee cups. Eventually, she checked her watch and realized she had to return to work. She gathered her folder, thanked him for the company, and stood. He rose slightly from his seat in that old-fashioned, respectful way that made her smile. "Take care, Sophia," he said, using her name for the first time. She blinked in mild surprise, then remembered she'd introduced herself to the barista earlier. Still, the sound of her name in his voice felt different, warm, almost steadying. Outside, the sky had cleared, the streets washed clean by the morning's drizzle. She walked back to the office feeling lighter, not because anything grand had happened, but because something small had gone right. Later, as she organized her files, she caught herself glancing at the cafe receipt tucked inside her folder. On the back, written in neat, slanted handwriting, were two words, "Keep smiling." She hadn't seen him write it, hadn't noticed him slip the note in, but somehow it felt exactly like something he would do. That night, when she lay in bed replaying the day, she realized what felt different. For the first time in months, someone had looked at her not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone already worth noticing. And though she didn't know it yet, this small conversation between strangers would become the quiet spark that changed the direction of her days. The next morning unfolded like any other, with sunlight crawling gently across Sophia's curtains and the sound of distant traffic humming from the street below. She woke slower than usual, letting herself linger in that soft space between sleep and thought, where the memory of yesterday still glowed faintly. The cafe, Noah's calm eyes, the note that said "Keep smiling." All of it came back like a quiet echo she didn't want to silence yet. She reached for her phone, half expecting another text from Liam, but her screen was empty. It didn't bother her this time. Some absences had started to feel like relief. By 8, she was ready for work. Hair pinned back, a navy dress, the faintest gloss on her lips. On her way out, she tossed her old purse into her bag without noticing the zipper had started to loosen at one edge. She grabbed a croissant from the corner vendor, smiled at the old woman selling flowers beside him, and hurried toward the office. It wasn't until late afternoon that she realized her purse was missing. She'd gone for a client delivery across town, juggling her bag, a coffee cup, and several proof sheets when she reached for her wallet, and found only air. Her stomach sank. Inside that purse were her ID, transport card, and a small charm bracelet she'd worn since college. She retraced her steps twice, even checked with the delivery receptionist, but nothing. By the time she returned to her desk, frustration had settled into her chest. Losing something felt worse when you couldn't remember how. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept circling back to the missing purse. Then, as if timed by fate, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hi, Sophia. This is Noah Rain. I believe you left your purse at the cafe yesterday." She blinked at the screen, disbelief cutting through the weariness. Her purse? Yesterday? That didn't make sense. She hadn't noticed it missing then. Still, she typed back quickly. "Oh my God, yes. I didn't even realize. You found it." A moment later, the The barista found it under the seat this morning. She called me since I'd been there with you. I thought you might need it back. Her fingers hesitated on the keyboard. Of course, he'd left an impression strong enough for someone to remember them together. Thank you. I can come by to pick it up after work, if that's okay? He replied almost instantly. Sure. Same cafe, around 6? I'll bring it. When she arrived, the place was quieter than the last time. Dimmer lights, evening music spilling softly through the speakers. Noah was already there, a cup of tea in front of him and her small tan purse resting neatly on the table beside it. He stood when he saw her. I can't believe you found it, she said, relief and a bit of laughter in her voice. Technically, the barista did, he replied, smiling. But I figured you might not have her number. She reached for the purse, checking inside quickly. Everything was intact. You even kept it safe. He shrugged lightly. Didn't seem right to hand it to just anyone. Something about the way he said it made her heart give a small, unexpected skip. She sat across from him, intending to thank him properly. But their conversation slid back into that same, effortless rhythm they'd found before. They talked about simple things. How the weather always seemed unpredictable lately. How the cafe's playlist leaned too heavily on the same few jazz tracks. How she used to sketch cityscapes when she was stressed. He listened, really listened. There was no performative charm, no deliberate flirting. Just quiet connection. When her tea arrived, she noticed he'd already paid for it. You didn't have to, she began, but he cut her off gently. It's fine. Consider it a celebration for finding lost things. She smiled, tracing the rim of the cup. I'm not sure everything lost gets found again. He tilted his head, eyes soft. Some things do, just not always the way we expect. For a moment, their gaze held, not heavy or charged, just calm, steady recognition. And in that small pause, Sophia realized she hadn't felt so at ease with anyone in a long time. By the time they left the cafe, evening had folded neatly into night. They walked toward the main street together, the air faintly cool. She thanked him again as a cab pulled up, and he offered a quiet nod. Be careful, Sophia, he said, opening the door for her. She hesitated before getting in, as if there was something else she wanted to say but couldn't quite name. See you around? His smile deepened. I'd like that. When the cab rolled away, she looked out the rear window and saw him still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching until the car turned the corner. For the first time since her breakup, the world didn't feel so hollow. It felt like something or someone had quietly found its way in. That night, back in her apartment, she set her recovered purse on the dresser and caught her reflection in the mirror. Not the tired girl who'd been abandoned days ago, but someone rediscovering her own light. Somewhere in the quiet hum of her heart, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the stranger who had promised he'll regret it was already beginning to make good on his word. The cab hummed away and left Sophia with a little room to breathe. The city around her felt ordinary again, but ordinary in a kinder way than it had a week earlier. She hung her recovered purse on the back of a chair and sat for a moment at the kitchen counter, letting the quiet settle, a small smile softening her face. The note in the cafe and the way Noah had returned the purse without asking for anything had lodged themselves in her like a warm pebble you kept in your pocket. For 2 days, life resumed its routine, work, errands, small tasks. But she found herself looking longer at windows, half expecting to see him in the fold of some afternoon light. On the 3rd afternoon, she stepped out to buy printer ink and a replacement strap for her bag. The street vendors were busy, and the market smelled of peppers and frying plantain. She moved through the crowd with the casual attention of someone who had learned to enjoy small scenes of public life. And then, between a stall selling used novels and a florist arranging a bucket of chrysanthemums, she ran almost literally into him. He was bending over a cardboard box of second-hand books, fingers riffling through the spines as if searching for a particular title. For a heartbeat she thought she'd misread the whole thing. The way he crouched, reaching for a battered copy of a travel memoir, and then he looked up and their eyes met. The surprise that passed over both their faces was immediate and honest. like two people who'd both been saving a corner of themselves for a moment that now arrived unexpectedly. He stood, smoothing his jacket as if embarrassed to have been caught looking so domestic, and for a second they simply laughed, brief, relieved, the kind of laugh that acknowledged how unlikely their meeting was. "Small world," he said, and she realized she'd been holding groceries in one hand and the strap she'd bought in the other. He asked, without real curiosity or plan, whether she wanted help carrying anything. There was no grand gesture in the offer, just the practical politeness of someone who lived efficiently and kindly. She declined, saying she was fine, then changed her mind and let him scoop up the bag of printer ink, grateful for the company on the walk back to her street. Conversation started easy because they had a running catalog of small shared memories now, the cafe receipt, the hairpin, the note on the back of a folder. He asked about the charm bracelet she'd been worried about losing, and she told him it belonged to her sister, how they'd swapped charms on graduation day. He listened, then told a short story about losing a similar memento when he was younger and finding it years later in a pocket of an old coat, and how the ridiculousness of that discovery had felt like fate's way of apologizing for forgetfulness. It was the kind of story that could have been sentimental, but he told it without sentimentality, which made it truer. As they reached the corner where their paths would separate, he mentioned, offhandedly, like a fact from a grocery list, that there was a small weekend market nearby where local makers sold homemade sauces and knitted hats. "They always have the best plain almond cake," he added, as if reminding her of nothing and everything at once. She laughed and said she loved anything almond, and he suggested, again casually, that she stop by on Saturday. She almost said no. She had work and bills, and the sensible part of her resented being asked to make time for neat coincidences. But she surprised herself by saying yes, not because she wanted to be polite, but because the idea of seeing him again felt like saying yes to a small rescue. Later, when she told a friend about the encounter over coffee, her friend teased that Sophia was collecting good men like rare coins. Sophia only smiled and thought of the quiet way Noah had folded a jacket over his arm as they walked, the way he'd asked about trivial things and actually listened to the answers. The weekend market was bright and full of people. The almond cake was, as he'd promised, unexpectedly good. Noah was there before she arrived, crouched by a stall of reclaimed wood coasters, examining a pattern like a man who appreciated work done with care. He greeted her with the same calm ease, and they wandered through the stalls together, stopping to try a sample of honey, remark on a painter's loose city sketches, and share a small jam jar between two spoons. No cameras, no fans, no manufactured moments. Just a man and a woman walking slowly through a place where ordinary life sells its small pleasures. There was a point, mid-afternoon, when a musician struck a gentle chord and Noah paused, turning his face to the sun as if he'd been waiting for that particular quiet. He told her, quietly, that he liked bringing parts of the city back to life, repairing an old bookshop roof, funding a sidewalk garden, backing a youth carpentry class. The projects were local, hands-on things, not grand gestures. Sophia listened with a thread of surprise. The image of a billionaire in her head had been a caricature from films, all glass and distance. This man preferred wood to marble, steady plans to spectacle. She told him about the printing press downtown, how the owner wanted to expand but lacked funds for the new presses, and he asked for the owner's name before she'd even finished the sentence. It was the smallest, truest sign, the way he moved from conversation into action without fanfare. The afternoon folded into evening slowly, as the market lights twinkled on, and they parted when the air cooled. On the way home, Sophia thought about the way coincidence had become a known friend over the last week, arriving not as a trope but as a gentle shift in her day-to-day. She felt safer than she had in months. Not because a man had promised revenge or romance, but because someone had offered attention that carried no strings and kept its promises small and concrete. Returning a purse, sharing a laugh, showing up on a Saturday for cake. Back in her flat, she left the almond cake box on the counter and called her sister, excitedly recounting the afternoon. When she hung up, a notification blinked on her phone. Liam had sent another message asking if they could talk, but the urge to answer it no longer felt urgent. She smiled, tucked her phone away, and for the first time in a long while let herself believe that chance encounters could be the beginning of something steadier and truer than the hurried promises that had come before. The week after the market felt unusually quiet, but not the lonely kind of quiet. It was the soft, anticipatory sort, like a room waiting for music to begin again. Sophia moved through her days lighter, her coworkers noticing that she smiled more often now, that her silences seemed warmer instead of distant. She didn't say why. The memory of that market afternoon lived in her chest like sunlight she could carry around. Noah had texted only once since then, a simple message on Tuesday afternoon. I found another cafe that serves almond cake, maybe better than the one at the market. Would you trust my judgment? She had replied with a single word. Maybe. By Thursday evening, they'd settled on meeting again. Same cafe as before, the one where everything had started. The air was cooler now, the shift toward early autumn creeping in. Sophia arrived a few minutes early, taking the same seat by the window. She could still remember the first time she'd sat there, heartbroken, thinking the night couldn't possibly turn into anything meaningful. When Noah walked in, dressed simply in a gray coat and navy scarf, it didn't feel like the entrance of a man used to commanding attention. He carried it differently, quietly. He greeted her with the same gentle composure, and for a few minutes, they spoke of harmless things. The cake, her long week at work, his trip to a new project site on the city's outskirts. But under the rhythm of their words was something unspoken, pulsing steady and alive. Halfway through their coffee, the pause came naturally, like an invisible cue. She looked up from her cup and met his gaze. You have this way of showing up exactly when I'm not expecting anyone, she said. He smiled faintly. Maybe I just have good timing. Or maybe you make timing look like something we can trust again, she replied softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise first, then something deeper, something like understanding. He set his cup down slowly. Can I tell you something? He asked. Of course. He leaned back slightly, eyes on the table as he spoke. That night at the restaurant when I saw you sitting alone, there was something familiar in the way you looked. Not your face exactly. The feeling. You looked like someone trying hard to keep her dignity when the world had just reminded her she wasn't safe from disappointment. He hesitated. I know that look because I've worn it myself. Sophia didn't speak right away. She let the words sink in, the rawness behind them. You? She asked quietly. What could possibly make you? He gave a small, humorless laugh. Everyone assumes that people like me, men with money, titles, whatever, don't get left behind. But I've been left, Sophia, by people who wanted the idea of me, not the reality. I don't usually talk about it. But that night, when I saw you, I just didn't want you to think that being left said anything about your worth. His voice was steady but low, threaded with the kind of honesty that stripped away charm and left only truth. She didn't know what to say at first. Her eyes softened. You really believed he'd regret it? She said after a while, half a smile tugging at her lips. I did, he said simply. And I still do. There was no drama in the way he said it, no cinematic buildup, just quiet certainty. Sophia felt something inside her shift, an old wall finally giving way. She took a breath. Then I should probably tell you something too. He nodded, waiting. I think I stopped waiting for an apology from the wrong person. Maybe that's what healing really is, realizing some people can't give you what you were hoping for, and learning to forgive them anyway. Her voice trembled slightly, but it wasn't sadness. It was release. Noah reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. You don't owe anyone forgiveness that costs your peace, he said gently. You owe yourself permission to move forward. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with understanding, the kind of quiet that feels like standing at the edge of something new. When his fingers finally brushed hers, she didn't pull away. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not entirely. It was acknowledgement. Promise that didn't need words. Outside, the streetlights began to glow, soft and amber. People passed by the window, couples, workers. Laughter carried faintly through the glass. Inside, time seemed to stretch. When they finally rose to leave, Sophia felt calm, almost grounded in a way she hadn't in months. At the door, he turned to her and said, I don't know what this is yet, Sophia. But I don't want to pretend it's just coincidence anymore. She looked at him, really looked, and for once didn't feel afraid of what came next. Neither do I, she said quietly. They walked into the cool evening side by side. No confessions of love, no promises of forever. Just the quiet truth of two people who had finally said what needed to be said. That night, Sophia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart steady, her thoughts clear. She realized Noah hadn't fixed her. He'd reminded her that she hadn't been broken in the first place. And somewhere between his honesty and her courage, something new had begun. Something neither of them could yet name, but both could feel. By the next morning, the echo of last night's confession hadn't left Grace's mind. She kept replaying Noah's words, the way his voice softened when he admitted he hadn't planned to care, the honesty in his eyes when he said he wanted something real. It should have felt like a dream, something sweet to hold on to, but reality always found its way back. She had work that morning, deadlines, and a mind that couldn't decide whether to trust what had just begun. When she reached the office, the air felt off. People paused their whispers when she passed. Two of the interns who usually greeted her with smiles gave her that tight-lipped look, polite on the surface, but laced with something else. By the time she reached her desk, her stomach was already heavy. Something was wrong. It didn't take long for her friend and colleague, Sophia Wells, to walk in holding her phone like a loaded weapon. "Grace," Sophia said quietly, sliding the screen toward her. "I thought you should see this before anyone else does." There it was, a blog post, headline bold, bright, and cruel. Up-and-coming designer spotted leaving billionaire Noah Rain's apartment at midnight. The attached photo was blurry but unmistakable. Grace's silhouette, Noah's car, the dim streetlight outside his building. The comments below stung even worse. People assuming, judging, twisting. Grace's heart dropped. This can't be happening. Sophia sighed, sitting beside her. It's spreading fast. Someone must have followed you. Do you think it's from the event last week? Or maybe someone from the restaurant? Grace couldn't speak for a few seconds. She hadn't even told Sophia the full story of that night. How Noah had stepped in, how things slowly changed. It was private, fragile, still trying to take shape. And now it was splashed across gossip sites like a headline meant to humiliate. By noon, her phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, notifications. Even Liam Starr, her boss, sent a terse message. "We'll need to talk about the article." She left for lunch just to breathe, but the whispers followed her outside too. At the cafe across the street, two women at the next table were scrolling through the same post, their voices carrying just enough for Grace to hear. "She doesn't even look his type," one said. "You know how these billionaires are, always playing rescue for attention." Grace gripped her coffee cup, trying to steady herself. She wanted to scream that it wasn't like that Noah wasn't that kind of man, that she wasn't using him for anything. But words wouldn't change gossip. That evening, Noah called. "Grace, are you okay?" His tone was firm but laced with concern. "Do I sound okay?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Everyone thinks I slept my way into some fairy tale." "I saw the article," he admitted. "I'm already talking to my PR team. We'll have it taken down." She let out a bitter laugh. "You can't erase the internet, Noah." "Then I'll do something better," he said after a pause. "I'll tell the truth." She went quiet. "The truth?" "Yes, that I met you by chance. That you're not some fling or story for clicks. That you're the only person who's made me feel human in a very long time." Her heart trembled, caught between gratitude and fear. "If you do that, they'll only twist it more. They'll say you're confirming it." "I don't care," he said simply. "I'm not letting them drag your name because of me." Grace didn't answer right away. Part of her wanted to believe that kind of protection was enough, but another part, the cautious part, reminded her that she'd worked hard to build her reputation. She couldn't afford to be defined by someone else's last name. Later that night, Sophia texted again. "Turn on the news. Now." Grace's breath caught as she saw Noah Rain on a live interview. Composed, his voice calm but firm. When the host asked about the rumor, he said clearly, "Grayson Wells is not a rumor. She's a remarkable designer and someone I deeply respect. Anyone implying otherwise should rethink their words. Her phone vibrated instantly, messages pouring in, some apologetic, others curious. The tide was slowly turning, but the damage had already left a mark. Still, for the first time that day, Grace smiled faintly. Not because everything was fixed, but because Noah had chosen honesty over silence, and that, in her world, meant everything. She exhaled, closing her laptop. Maybe tomorrow, things would still be messy, but tonight, she'd allow herself to breathe. The world could keep whispering. She knew what was real. The next morning felt calmer, though a certain heaviness still lingered in the air. Grace woke up to a string of notifications, some supportive messages from clients, a few polite check-ins from colleagues, and one from her boss, Liam Starr. "We'll discuss your next steps at 10. 10 o'clock came faster than she expected. Liam was seated at the long glass table when she entered his office, his expression unreadable. "Grace," he began, sliding a folder toward her. "You've had a rough few days, but the buzz has made your name trend, and the rain interview didn't exactly hurt. People are paying attention." She frowned. "Are you saying that's a good thing?" "I'm saying it can be," he replied evenly. "There's a brand in New York that wants to collaborate. They think you and Noah have chemistry the public can't ignore. A fashion meets philanthropy campaign. High visibility, major budget. They call it the rain effect." Grace blinked at the title. "That sounds like they're selling gossip, not design." "Welcome to publicity," Liam said, almost kindly. "Use it before it uses you." She left the office torn. The proposal glittered with opportunity, exposure, financial stability, even a possible feature in Elle. But beneath that shine was something that made her stomach tighten. Accepting would mean tying her name to Noah's publicly, turning a private connection into a storyline for marketing. By noon, she sat at a quiet cafe, her laptop open, the contract staring back at her. She hadn't called Noah since his interview. She wanted to. Part of her missed the calm of his voice, but she didn't know how to bridge the space between gratitude and fear. When she finally did call, he answered on the second ring. "Grace," he said, relief audible. "I was hoping you'd call." She didn't waste time. "There's an offer. Collaboration. They want us to work together for a campaign." He paused. "And you don't sound thrilled." "Because it feels like a trap," she admitted. "They're using the rumor. They're using us." "Then don't sign anything yet," he said quickly. "Let me talk to them." "No," she said firmly. "This is my career, Noah. I can handle it. I just needed to tell you before making a choice." He was quiet for a moment before asking softly, "What do you want?" That question hit her deeper than she expected. What did she want? To protect her work? To protect her heart? Maybe both. "I want to be seen for what I create," she said finally. "Not for who I'm seen with." "Then that's what will make them see," Noah replied. "If you take the deal, we control the narrative. We design it around your work, your vision, not gossip." The conviction in his voice steadied her. "And if it backfires?" "Then it backfires on both of us," he said without hesitation. "Not just you." That night, Grace went through the proposal again, this time imagining what it could be if done on her terms. A line inspired by resilience, by finding strength when the world misjudges you. She began sketching, each stroke lighter, freer. 2 days later, she walked back into Liam's office. "I'll do it," she said, "but I'll lead the creative direction. No PR gimmicks, no fake headlines. Just real work." Liam arched an eyebrow. "Confident today, aren't we?" "Just clear," she said, slipping the signed folder across the table. When she left the building, her phone buzzed again. A message from Noah. "Dinner tonight. Not press. Just us." She smiled, typing back a single line. "Only if we talk about fabrics, not feelings." His reply came seconds later. "No promises." That evening, as she walked to meet him, Lagos's sky, streaked with fading gold, reflected how she felt inside. Not entirely calm, but no longer storming. The world might still be watching, but for once, she didn't feel exposed. She felt seen. The campaign went public a week later, elegant, minimal, and powerful. The photographs weren't about glitz. They captured stories in fabric, resilience in design. Grace stood beside Noah at the launch, both of them poised but not pretending. For once, she wasn't just the woman rumored to be with a billionaire. She was Grace and Wells, designer, creative lead, and the woman behind every stitch of the collection. But behind the flash of cameras and interviews, not everything glittered. The night after the event, as Grace packed up at the studio, Sophia stormed in, holding her phone. "Tell me it's not true," she demanded. Grace blinked. "What?" "That you and Noah signed a private deal behind the company's back," Sophia said, breathless. "There's a new article. It says the collaboration was funded by him directly, not through Liam's firm. People are saying you used your connection for leverage." Grace's body froze. "That's a lie." "Then fix it fast," Sophia urged. "Because the narrative is changing again. And this time, they're making it sound like you played him and the company." Grace didn't waste another second. She grabbed her bag and called Noah immediately. "Where are you?" she asked, voice tight. "At the office," he said. "What's wrong?" "Someone leaked another story. It says you funded the campaign personally." "I did," he said quietly. She stopped walking. "You what?" "I didn't want you to lose the project," Noah said, his voice steady. "Liam was hesitating because of the backlash, so I stepped in. I thought it would protect you." Her stomach dropped. "You should have told me, Noah. Now it looks like I needed saving again." "Grace." "No," she cut in. "You don't get to make those decisions for me. I fought to prove I wasn't with you for money, and now the whole world thinks I took your hand out." The line went silent for a moment. Then his tone softened. "That's not what I wanted. But it's what happened," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't trust me enough to let me handle it on my own." When she arrived at his office, the tension between them was thick enough to choke on. Noah was standing by the window, the city lights stretching behind him like a painting. "You shouldn't have come here angry," he said gently, turning to face her. "And you shouldn't have done anything without me," she snapped back. "You can't fix everything with money, Noah. Sometimes you just have to let things play out." He stepped closer, his eyes tired but sincere. "You think I don't know that? Grace, I've built walls my whole life. Money was always my way to control the chaos. But you're the one thing I can't control. I just didn't want to lose you to a rumor."